I think, is to look at it through three different timescales. Very short term, what's happening from week to week, month to month. Medium term, what's the outlook for the next year or so? And then long term, and the big long term question, which is the most interesting one, is what Trump doing really going to end the period of so-called American exceptionalism, where America has dominated the world, not just militarily, but in technology, in finance, in culture, in science, in everything? Could this be the end of American exceptionalism? And people are asking that, and actually that's already been reflected to some extent in market movements. The dollar's gone down against every currency in the world. The US stock market, for the first time in 15 years, has underperformed European markets, Chinese markets, emerging markets, and so on. So, and people are to some extent pulling their money out of America over the last 3 months. Now, the way I look at it is this, that in the short term, I think so much of what's coming out is just noise, because they make an announcement one day. We've no idea whether the tariffs will stay at 10% or 20% or 30%. And every time the White House makes an announcement, the market moves in that direction. But I don't think you can trust any of these moves. And unless you're a kind of very lucky or very skillful day trader, or you have inside information, which Trump's family do and the people around him do, I think it's very dangerous to trade on that basis. So let's leave the short-term side. Long term, we don't know whether this will really be the end of American dominance. And actually, we won't know until the next decade, because these are till Trump's gone, and even if Trump continues the way he has and damages American science or universities or undermines the confidence of foreign holders of the dollar because of sanctions and things like that, we still don't know whether that will be a permanent effect or not for another 5-10 years. But what I think I feel pretty confident of is that the sentiment in financial markets and in the world as a whole about whether America is losing its dominance or not will be very, very strongly influenced or determined by what happens in the next 6 to 9 months. So if you have, in the next 6 to 12 months, a recession in the US, which means not just 2 quarters of negative GDP, which is one definition, but a big increase in unemployment and a sense that the American economy is really in a bad state. If you have that, then that will definitely intensify the questioning of long-term American dominance and whether people should have as much of their money in dollars and so on. On top of that, if you have a recession in the US, which is not accompanied by a recession in the rest of the world economy, that will be a huge event, because this will be the first time in 30 years, arguably even in 50 years, that you have a reversal of the old cliche. The cliche was always when America sneezes, the rest of the world gets pneumonia. And that's been basically true for the last 30 years. It was spectacularly true in 2008 with a big financial crisis, which started in America, but it ended up doing much more damage to Europe and to most emerging markets than it did to the US. It was true even with 2020 and COVID. Everybody locked down, but America recovered very quickly, whereas Britain still hasn't fully recovered. So the cliche has been, every time there's a downturn in the world economy, it's always much worse in Europe and usually worse in emerging economies and in China. This time round, I think there's a pretty high probability that there will be a downturn in the US, and it won't be even accompanied by a downturn in the rest of the world. And if that happened, it will have a big effect on the sentiment about the long-term outlook as well. Now, the reason I think that will happen is pretty simple, because the tariffs are a tax on American consumers. They're not a tax on British or European or Chinese consumers. And the uncertainty about, are the tariffs going up? Are they going down? Where are they? Again, it affects American business, American employment, much more than employment anywhere else. So I think for those two reasons, a recession or at least a pretty severe economic downturn is very likely in the US in the second half of this year. But it doesn't need to afflict the rest of the world. And this is where we come back to, the policies in the rest of the world. I don't think it will affect Europe because Europe is already switching to a more proactive, government spending, tax cut kind of approach. I don't think it will affect China because China is doing that. I do worry that it may affect Britain because Britain is the one country where, as I said, there's still this contract with the voters saying, well, if we're hit by a shock for America, we'll have to tighten the belts even further, and that will make things worse. And that's why I think that's where we're going for the next 6 months. But I think in 9 months' time, there'll have to be a U-turn.
This was a clip from our chat with economist Anatol Koletsky about what's going on in the global economy. To watch the full episode, click right here.